Robb Stark stood near the flickering fire in the black of night, the wind curling through the pines like it carried ghosts in its teeth. The battle plan was laid before him, an ambush in the whispering wood. 1,000 men ready, horses quiet, steel polished. They would strike at Jaime Lannister's camp before dawn, catch the Golden Lion asleep in his tent, and take him alive. It was a perfect plan. War-winning, even, but something gnawed at Robb's heart. Catelyn Stark sat beside the fire, her face drawn with worry that made her look far older than her years. She wasn't there to approve the plans. She was there to warn him. This war isn't just about tactics, Robb. If we capture Jaime, we'll have to decide what to do with him, and that choice will define you. Robb's jaw tensed. He started this. He crippled Bran. He tried to kill him, and he's... Your only leverage, Catelyn whispered. If you spill his blood now, Tywin will burn half the Riverlands for it. If you take him and hold him, we can exchange him for Sansa, for Arya. Robb looked into the flames. In that moment, the war didn't feel like battles and banners and glory. It felt like choosing which part of your soul to cut out. Later, when grey wind growled and the signal was nearly given, Robb raised his hand. He looked out into the woods where his men waited for his command, and then he said the words no one expected to hear. We wait, we hold the line. Jaime rides tonight. His bannermen stared at him like he'd grown a second head. Great John Umber stepped forward, veins bulging in his neck. You're letting the Kingslayer go. After all this, I'm not risking men's lives for a prize we can't hold, Robb said coldly. Tywin's army moves too fast. If we're trapped here with Lannister banners descending from the south, we'll be crushed before the moon sets again. No one spoke for a moment. Even the wind seemed to pause, holding its breath in shock. Jaime Lannister, untouched and unbothered, rode out with his cavalry at dawn, not knowing how close death had brushed him. When word reached Tywin Lannister that his son had not been taken, his eyes narrowed. He had expected Robb Stark to show teeth, to come snarling and howling like the rest of the northern dogs. Instead, the boy hesitated. Tywin smiled. That was all he needed. Within 2 weeks, Riverrun was surrounded. The Tullys, expecting Robb's promised reinforcements, found only silence and smoke. Lord Edmure cursed Robb's name as he watched the Lannister flags rise over the riverbanks. And at Harrenhal, Arya Stark scrubbed floors under a false name, not knowing her brother had just let go of the only piece that could have brought her home. In the north, the people didn't know strategy or politics. They only knew that Robb Stark had promised vengeance, and vengeance hadn't come. Whispers began. Quiet, bitter ones. He let the lion go. Maybe he's not his father after all. He's still just a boy. Catelyn tried to hold the pieces together. He did what he had to. He spared hundreds of lives by not fighting that night. But people didn't understand mercy in war. They only understood victory. And so the wolf who could have taken the lion's head became the boy who let him ride. It haunted Robb more than the loss of the Riverlands or the fall of allies. It was the moment he began to lose the war not with swords, but with silence. He knew every time someone avoided his eyes, every time they called him Your Grace, but didn't mean it. He could feel it slipping. And in King's Landing, when Cersei heard Jaime was still alive and free, her laughter filled the Red Keep like a church bell ringing at a funeral. He had one chance, she said, sipping her wine, and he blinked. The nights grew colder in the Riverlands, and with each one, Robb Stark felt more alone in the war he had once commanded with fire and fury. What had started with Ban screaming his name in loyalty now felt like a long, quiet procession, towards something he couldn't name but feared deeply. After the missed ambush in the Whispering Wood, Jaime Lannister didn't just ride free, he rode back with knowledge. He knew the North was led by a boy who hesitated, who listened to his mother more than his men. And when he spoke to his father, he painted Robb Stark not as a threat, but as a mistake. Tywin Lannister never let a mistake linger. Riverrun fell. Quickly, Edmure, Tully, bitter and furious, tried to hold the siege as long as he could. But the Lannisters came with fire and siege towers, and when they breached the walls, they didn't offer mercy. Catelyn's brother was dragged through the streets of his own home, bloodied and half alive. A message for the North. At Robb's War Council, the map of Westeros looked like it had been bled on. Half the riverlands were gone. The Freys, once bitter allies, now played both sides, sending ravens to Tywin as often as they did to Robb and his own men. They had started to question. Roose Bolton, cold and unreadable as ever, leaned over the table and tapped his finger. On Riverrun, this didn't have to fall, he said plainly. Had we taken the Kingslayer, we could have bargained them back. Your kin, your banners. Robb didn't answer. He knew it. Every part of him knew it. But it didn't change what he'd felt that night. That rushing into Whispering Wood meant gambling hundreds of northern lives in exchange for one golden-haired lion. I chose to keep my men alive, Robb said. I stand by that. Roose's eyes didn't blink. Sometimes kings have to trade men for kingdoms. Catelyn looked up sharply. Is that your advice to a king, Lord Bolton? Blood for stone? Roose's smile never touched his eyes. My advice, my lady, is that your son is bleeding faster than he's gaining ground. And if he keeps choosing shadows over strategy, we'll all hang for it. That night, Robb walked among the tents alone. He didn't wear his crown, didn't bring guards. He just listened. Men sharpening swords, drinking, some laughing, some whispering. He heard his name spoken like a prayer in one corner and like a curse in another. Should have taken Jaime when we had the chance. He's got the name, not the bite. The king in the north, more like the pup in the mud. The words cut deeper than blades. Robb wanted to scream. He wanted to remind them he had one battle scrag, Ashmark, Oxcross, that he had bled for every inch of ground. But none of that mattered now. People remembered the chance he didn't take. By the time they reached the twins for the marriage alliance with House Frey, the mood was different. The welcome colder. Walder Frey's leering smile more mocking than respectful. You were supposed to be my soon-in-law, boy, Walder said, feigning regret. Instead, you send me a message saying you're marrying some girl from Volantis. What am I supposed to do with all these daughters, then? Feed them to the wolves. Robb tried to smooth it over. You'll have my Uncle Edmure and my loyalty. Walder laughed, a dry, mean sound. Your loyalty. I've seen what your loyalty is worth, Robb Stark. Ask your uncle. Oh wait, you can't. The insult hung heavy in the room. But Robb, tired and desperate, swallowed his pride. We're still allies, Lord Frey, and I don't forget my debts. You already forgot the war, Walder spat, his eyes gleaming. Just don't know it yet. Robb left that hall with his fists clenched and his jaw tight. Outside, Catelyn caught up to him. That man will slit your throat while you sleep. Robb didn't disagree, but what could he do? He had few allies left, fewer victories, and a kingdom slipping between his fingers like river water. He had let Jaime Lannister go, and now everything his allies, his love, his crown was bleeding because of it. In the red chambers of King's Landing, Tywin Lannister laid the final bricks of a plan that would echo through history. He would invite the Starks to a feast. He would dress his revenge in music and meat and courtesy. And while the wolves drank, the lions would sharpen their teeth. It rained the night Robb Stark rode into the Twins for the wedding of his uncle Edmure Tully to one of Walder Frey's many daughters. The sky wept with the kind of grey sorrow that settled in the bones, and the northern banners, once bold, in the wind now hung limp and soaked. Catelyn rode beside her son in silence. She hadn't spoken much since Riverrun fell. Some wounds didn't need words. They just sat there between people, like a fire gone cold, reminding them of what once burned bright. The Freys welcomed them with false cheer and wide crooked grins. Walder Frey himself hobbled forward, arms outstretched in performative warmth. "Ah, the king in the north," he said, loud enough for the whole hall to hear. "The boy who breaks promises." Robb smiled tightly, but his eyes were wary. "Lord Frey, I come to honor the alliance. My uncle is yours." "And your crown?" Walder asked, voice dipped in venom. "Is that still intact, boy? Or did you lose it somewhere in the mud while letting lions slip away?" The jab struck deep, but Robb held his composure. He had grown used to the murmurs, the quiet contempt. But here, under the stone ceilings of the Twins, the contempt wasn't quiet anymore. It breathed through every corridor. Still, the feast began. Edmure, awkward and embarrassed, stood beside his bride a plain, pale girl with fearful eyes. Robb drank little. His bannermen, however, drank heavily. The Greatshon, Lord Car's sons, even the Blackfish all filled their cups and tried to drown their doubts in Frey wine. Catelyn watched the musicians. There were too many of them. Their fingers too tight on their instruments, their smiles too fixed. She leaned toward Robb. Something's wrong. He didn't argue. He had felt it too, like the air itself was holding its breath. But there was no time to speak. The doors slammed shut, the music changed, and the wolves were caged. It began with a scream one of Edmure's guards stabbed through the neck before he could reach his sword. Then another and another. Frey men, dressed as servants, pulled blades from sleeves and began the slaughter. The Stark banners fell. First, Greatshon Umber stood up with a roar, sword half drawn, before crossbow bolts struck him in the chest. He dropped like a mountain falling. Robb reached for his sword, but 3 Frey guards were already on him. One slashed his arm, another his thigh. He fought like a cornered beast, grey wind snarling outside the gates, tearing through guards until the arrows found him too. Blood spilled across the floor like wine. Catelyn screamed her son's name. She grabbed a knife from the table and seized Walder Frey's youngest wife by the hair, pressing the blade to her throat. "Let him go," she shouted. "Let him go, and I'll let her live." Walder Frey didn't even flinch. "I'll find another." The moment stretched too long, and then came the blade. Robb staggered forward, clutching at the crossbow bolt buried in his chest. He looked at his mother, eyes wide, lips parted. "Mother," the second bolt took him through the neck. He fell to his knees. The hall grew silent, saved for the dripping of blood. Catelyn watched her son fall, her hand trembling, and then she dragged the knife across the girl's throat and screamed as the guards cut her down. Outside, in the rain, the Stark soldiers were slaughtered. Bolton men had turned, the Freys had betrayed, and in a single night the North lost its king, its strength, and its heart. All because one boy, once upon a time, had chosen to let a lion go. Back in King's Landing, Tywin Lannister read the Raven's message with cold satisfaction. He passed it to Cersei, who smirked, tracing a finger over the words. "The North remembers," she said mockingly, "but not well enough." And Jaime, lounging with wine in hand, said nothing. He had seen what Robb Stark could have done, and he had seen what Robb Stark chose. Word travelled like a sickness, carried by ravens and whispered in marketplaces and mead halls. The king in the north is dead. When the news reached winter, the snows hadn't yet begun, but it felt like winter had fallen early. Maester Luwin, long gone, had once said that the north was made of ice and stone, but even he had never seen it this cold. Sansa Stark was sitting under the false sun in the gardens of King's Landing when she heard a servant, pale and stammering, dropped a goblet. The wine spread like blood on the stone. She heard the words from Petyr Baelish's lips, and for the first time since her father's execution, her legs gave out beneath her. "Robb," she whispered. Baelish crouched beside her, ever the snake, ever the opportunist. "Your brother made a mistake. He trusted wolves to honor guests." Sansa slapped him before she could stop herself. "You said he was winning," she hissed. "You said he was strong." "And he was," Littlefinger said softly, rubbing his cheek. "But strength without cruelty is wasted in this game." She didn't cry. The tears never came. They had dried long ago in that cold chamber, where she watched her father die. But something inside her cracked clean and deep. Not a break, a reshaping. That night she lit a candle in the window. Not for rescue, for revenge. In the Vale, Arya Stark watched the flames of a campfire dance across the face of Sandor Clegane. She had heard the Freymen boasting. They didn't know who she was when they laughed about the Wolf King who'd let the lion go and paid for it with his crown. Arya had sat in silence, blood boiling, and memorized every name they mocked. When they passed out from drink, she took needle and slid it through the throat of the loudest one. Quiet, fast, just like Syrio taught her. The hound never asked questions. He just stared at her afterward and said, "You're not a little girl." Any more, she didn't answer. She wasn't sure she ever had been. In the north, the remaining houses stirred with fury, but also with fear. House Karstark, leaderless and bitter, splintered. The Manderleys debated bending the knee to the Iron Throne just to protect White Harbor. And the Umbers, without the Greatjon, began whispering oaths to the Bolton's ruse. Bolton returned to the Dreadfort with a new title, Warden of the North. He wore it like armor, cool and clean. But his bastard, Ramsay Snow, wore something else, a flayed man's skin. The Boltons had not just betrayed the Starks, they had declared open war on their memory. Roose wrote letters to every northern lord, proclaiming peace under the Lannister banner. But those who knew the old ways, the true ways, only whispered. One sentence, "The North remembers." They said it in cellars, in crypts, in the shadows. But remembering wasn't the same as surviving. At Castle Black, Jon Snow stood on the wall and stared south, heart a storm of grief and fury. He had seen many die. He had buried brothers. But this was different. It was a second orphaning, a cruel erasure of everything Stark. Sam stood beside him, hesitant. "Robb was your brother." Jon didn't reply. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, where the wind carried the stench of death. And in the east, across the narrow sea, a girl, with silver hair and dragons at her side, heard whispers of the Red Wedding. She didn't know Robb Stark, but she knew betrayal. She knew slaughter. And she marked the Lannister's name in her heart with fire. The world changed that night in the Twins, not with wildfire, not with dragons, but with silence and song, steel and lies. A king who might have ruled the North for a generation fell. Not on the battlefield, but at a table. Not by the sword of a warrior, but by the whisper of a coward. And all because, once, he chose not to kill a man he could have slain. Jaime Lannister had lived, and so the wolfline died. The North did not weep. It froze. Snow blanketed the hills around Winterfell, as if the gods themselves were trying to bury the memory of House Stark. The direwolf banners were gone, replaced by the flayed man of House Bolton, fluttering proudly above the ancient stone walls. Inside, Roose Bolton walked through the cold corridors like a man finally home, calm, quiet, vicious in silence. He didn't need to shout to command fear, but the North remembered, not with rebellion, not yet. They remembered in the way they greeted his riders with thin smiles and thicker silences. They remembered by feeding his messengers hard bread and harder stares. Every house that bent the knee did so with a hand on the hilt of a hidden dagger. But Roose had a weapon even silence feared Ramsay. Ramsay Snow, legitimized now, called himself Ramsay Bolton and moved through the North like rot through old. Woody hunted women for sport, flayed small folk for rumors, burned villages to teach respect, and when anyone dared question his methods, he smiled and said, "My father trusts me." Roose did, to a point. But he also knew better than anyone. Dogs with too much blood on their teeth sometimes turn on their masters. Still, the Boltons ruled. With the Starks gone, no one stood to rally the banners. No king in the North. No heir, just whispers. One name repeated in secret. Rickon, the youngest Stark, believed to be dead, had vanished into the wilds with the wildling woman, Osha. No one knew where he was, but that didn't stop the hope. Hope, even in ashes, has a stubborn way of growing. Roots. And that hope made Roose nervous. Far away, in the Vale, Sansa Stark no longer cried at night. She studied. Littlefinger kept her in the Eyrie under the guise of protection, but Sansa had learned by now there is no such thing as safety, only moments between betrayals, and Petyr Baelish was nothing if not patient. He taught her lies, smiles, secrets. He whispered about lords and debts and marriages like they were chess pieces, but Sansa listened with quiet fire in her eyes. Every lesson a stone in the foundation of a fortress she was building inside herself. Then came the moment. Baelish spoke of marrying her off to a northern lord, one whose loyalty was strong, he said, one who was now Warden of the North, Roose Bolton. The name nearly made her blood turn to ice. Never, she said coldly. Baelish only smirked, then his bastard. A match that returns you to Winterfell. The North would rally behind you. Sansa stared at him. Or bury me with my brothers. He leaned in, voice like poisoned honey. You want revenge? Then go home, play the game, and gut the monster while he sleeps. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no. In Braavos, Arya Stark stood before the House of Black and White with blood on her hands and fire in her chest. She had discarded her name in front of the faceless men, but not in her heart. She still whispered it before bed. She still repeated the list, and Walder Frey was still on it. So was Roose Bolton. So was Ramsay. So was Jaime Lannister. In her darkest thoughts, Arya imagined what would have happened if Robb had struck first. He had taken Jaime's head in that forest instead of letting him ride. Would the Red Wedding have happened? Would Mother still be alive? Would she still be Arya? Back on the wall, Jon Snow received a raven sealed with red wax. It bore the sigil of House Bolton, a summons. Your brother is dead. Your sister is returned to Winterfell. Swear fealty or be named traitor. Jon burned the letter in silence. Not for show, not from rage, just resolve. He was no longer a boy, and the wall no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a wall between what he was and what he needed to become. The Boltons had killed his brother, but they hadn't killed the North. And the North, wounded, grieving, and bitter, was only waiting for someone to remind it who it truly belonged to. Winterfell's halls echoed with new footsteps. They were not the proud stride of Ned Stark, nor the warm patter of children chasing direwolves. These were harder, heavier. Ramsay Bolton's boots clicked against the stone like a metronome of madness. Blood followed him in streaks that no servant dared scrub too hard, as if removing the stain would invite it again. Sansa Stark walked those same halls, eyes forward, shoulders high, spine iron. She had returned to Winterfell, not as a bride, but as bait. Littlefinger's gift to House Bolton. A chance for the Boltons to secure the North through the false promise of a Stark heir at their side. But Ramsay wasn't interested in alliances. He was interested in pain. He hurt her, not always with hands, sometimes with words, with looks, with threats whispered in the dark. And Sansa learned, day by day, how to survive a monster. She didn't scream, didn't beg. She memorized the patrol routes, noted which guards drank too much, which doors creaked, which corridors hid darkness deep enough for plans. Ramsay thought she was broken, but she was sharpening. North of the wall, Jon Snow stood on frostbitten ground and read another raven scroll. Sansa's name, Bolton's name, marriage, claim lies. He crumpled the paper in a fist that shook with fury. They've taken her too, he said aloud. To no one in particular. Sam stepped forward. Jon, if you leave, you'll break your vows. Jon turned toward the horizon. So did they. He left Castle Black under cover of snow. He rode with a handful of loyal men, wildlings, outcasts, friends. They called it madness. Jon called it war. In the Riverlands, Walder Frey died choking on his own blood, his throat opened by a serving girl who wasn't a girl at all. Arya Stark, face wet with the warmth of her kill, smiled as his life drained away. No gods, no mercy, just vengeance. She left his sons dangling from the rafters, a message painted in blood across the hall. The North remembers, and it did. When Jon arrived at Winterfell, he didn't bring a banner. He brought truth. He brought Tormund, Jonspane, warriors, a pack of bitter northern houses, tired of bending the knee to flayed-skin tyrants. The Mormonts returned first, then the Hornwoods, the Glovers. Not all came. Some still feared the Boltons, but enough came. They came because the Starks had risen. Sansa opened the gates that night. She stood in the courtyard as Ramsay paced. The battlements, barking threats, arrows loosed, steel clanged. And inside the castle, Arya Stark moved like a shadow with needle in her hand. She slit throats quietly, sabotaged locks, led wolves into cages. When Jon and Ramsay finally stood face to face, it wasn't a battle, it was an execution. Jon didn't kill him with a sword. He beat him with his fists, each punch a year of grief, each strike a brother lost, a sister abused, a home stolen. And when it was done, Ramsay was thrown in the kennels. He died screaming as his own hounds, starved and loyal only to hunger, tore him apart. Winterfell was reclaimed. The banners of House Stark flew once more, tattered but high. Sansa stood beside Jon before the Lords of the North, her face unreadable, her voice clear. The North has no king, unless it is one of its own. They called Jon Snow the White Wolf. But in the shadows, Arya watched from the crypts. She didn't care about thrones. She still had names. In the east, Daenerys Targaryen prepared to sail with dragons and armies. In King's Landing, Cersei Lannister crowned herself queen over a city of ashes. And far beyond, the Night King marched, with his dead. But in the north, the wolves had returned, not with glory, not with triumph, but with vengeance, scars, and fire in their blood. Because once, Robb Stark let a lion live, and though he died for it, his sisters would not make the same mistake.